Maya Bennett, 34, pulled her thick wool coat tighter around her body as the snowstorm howled through Denver's empty streets like razors slicing through her skin. The city, infamous for its brutal winters, had come to a standstill tonight, and Maya's life felt just as frozen. Her pitch with Lucent Industries had wrapped an hour ago. The meeting ran longer than scheduled, and despite pouring her heart into her proposal, she left the boardroom with little more than tight-lipped smiles and a vague, "We'll be in touch." Not quite a no, but far from a yes. The problem? Her boutique design studio in San Francisco was hanging on by a thread. Lucent was the final lifeline. Without their account, Maya had maybe weeks before she'd have to shut her doors. And now, stranded in a freezing city where she knew no one, with flights grounded and every hotel booked solid, she couldn't help but feel the universe was closing every door at once. She stepped into the lobby of the Grand West Hotel, Denver's most luxurious, and for a moment, the warm wood paneling, soft golden lighting, and faint strains of jazz gave her a reprieve from panic. She couldn't afford even a night here. But the warmth felt worth pretending for a moment. "Miss, can I help you?" the concierge asked politely, though his eyes swept over her worn designer coat with subtle skepticism, as if questioning her place in such a setting. Maya took a breath. "Just waiting for the storm to ease. I'll be on my way soon." "I'm afraid every hotel in a 20-mile radius is fully booked. The Winter Tech Conference and the storm—" He trailed off with a sympathetic shrug. Then a deep, resonant voice behind her broke the moment. "Give her the suite adjoining mine. Put it under my name." Maya turned, and time seemed to freeze. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that screamed bespoke. His amber eyes locked on hers with unnerving intensity. She recognized him instantly. Julian Mercer, billionaire, founder of Mercer AI, one of Silicon Valley's most elusive venture capitalists. "I don't need charity," Maya said quickly, lifting her chin, even as her cheeks flamed with embarrassment. Julian smiled, and it changed his otherwise serious face into something dangerously compelling. "It's not charity. I've been looking for an excuse to escape another night of tedious investor calls. You look like a far better distraction." She should have said no. She knew that. But something in his gaze, cool but oddly sincere, made her step into the private elevator beside him, wordlessly, heart thudding like a warning she couldn't decipher. The elevator opened to the top floor. Maya stepped into the penthouse with cautious steps, her eyes quickly sweeping over the space. Vaulted ceilings, a stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a snow-blanketed city glowing beneath the night. This world felt galaxies away from her small San Francisco apartment. Julian shrugged off his coat, poured 2 glasses of what she recognized as aged scotch, and handed one to her. Maya took it, her fingers still chilled as they wrapped around the crystal glass. "So," she began, arching a brow, "do you make a habit of rescuing lost women from snowstorms?" "Only the ones who intrigue me," Julian replied, his gaze steady. Maya intended to keep her distance, but the heat, the quiet luxury, and the way he looked at her, as if she were a fascinating puzzle, kept her rooted. They talked about work, art, books. To her surprise, Julian had far more depth than the clinical articles she'd skimmed about his empire. When she mentioned running a small design firm, his brow lifted slightly. "Bennett Studio. You pitched to Lucent this afternoon, didn't you?" She froze. "You know?" "My firm just acquired a significant stake in Lucent," he said casually. "I watched the meeting via live stream." Maya's stomach dropped. "So, you saw me fail." "Not a failure, just mistimed," he said, sipping his drink. "But I saw something. In your ideas? In you?" She didn't know how to respond. He wasn't flattering her. His tone was too measured, too serious. Julian set his glass down and rose, walking to the window. He stood in silence for a moment, then turned back. "I have a proposition. It's personal. Unusual, maybe. But real?" Maya narrowed her eyes. "That sounds like the setup to a very strange movie?" He smirked. "Perhaps, but I assure you, I'm serious." He sat across from her. "I have a hereditary heart condition, not immediately life-threatening, but it complicates things. I have no close family, no children, and after building everything I've built, I want to leave something behind that matters." Maya's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure where this was going. "You're intelligent, driven, honest. I admire that. I want a child, not through a surrogate, not some distant donor. I want one, with someone like you?" She laughed. "You're asking me to have your child? Through a legal, clear arrangement. I'll invest $10 million into your firm, cover all medical expenses, postnatal care, and you would be the mother." Maya shot to her feet. "I'm not for sale." "You're not," Julian said gently, voice deepening. "I'm not buying you. I'm proposing a partnership, one that could save us both." "You think I'd agree to this? For money?" "No," he said, eyes never leaving hers. "I think you might consider it, because you're fighting for what you built, just like I did, and I respect that." Silence fell between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and unrelenting. Maya's world felt like it was shifting under her feet. She didn't say yes, but she didn't walk out either. 2 days later, Maya returned to San Francisco with her thoughts in knots. The misty city emerged beneath the airplane window, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Not the winding streets she used to love, not the sun-drenched corner of her tiny apartment, and certainly not the version of her life she had so carefully constructed, piece by piece. The moment she stepped into her modest office on the 4th floor of an aging building in the Mission District, she knew it was worse than she thought. An overdue electricity bill sat on her desk. A key client had pulled out at the last minute. Worst of all, her lead designer, her longest-standing partner, had resigned via a brief apologetic email. She sat in her chair, stunned. No ringing phones, no meetings to prepare for. Just the ticking of the wall clock like a countdown to the collapse of everything she'd built. Julian Mercer's face floated back into her mind, his voice, his eyes, his offer. She had nearly deleted the email he sent after she left Denver. Instead, she'd let it sit in her inbox like a dormant threat, or maybe a lifeline. "There's no pressure, but I believe we could create something necessary and beautiful." The last line had lodged itself deep in her thoughts. Maya wasn't someone easily bought. She had turned down investors before, ones who tried to turn her studio into a soulless commercial brand. But this wasn't just about money. This was survival, a chance to protect what she loved, her company, her dream, herself. And strangely, what unsettled her most wasn't the deal. It was Julian. The way he looked at her, not with pity, not with doubt, but as if he truly saw something in her worth believing in. Maya stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun dipped low over the flat city skyline, casting amber light across rooftops that glowed briefly before surrendering to dusk. She never imagined she'd make this decision. But maybe sometimes the biggest turning points begin with the most unexpected choices. She dialed the number from his email. Julian's voice came after 3 rings. Deep, steady. "I accept," Maya said without hesitation. "We'll do it your way, but I have conditions." A pause. "I'm listening." The call ended, but Maya's heart kept pounding like she'd just spoken something she couldn't take back. The next morning, she received an email from Julian, brief, courteous, yet somehow personal. He proposed they spend a few days at his private estate in the northern mountains outside Seattle to go over the terms, and more importantly, to simply spend time together before starting the medical process. Not to test or persuade, he wrote, but to create something real enough, grounded enough for what's coming next. Maya didn't know what she expected, but she certainly didn't expect her heart to stir like it did when the car curved through the silent forest and stopped in front of a house wrapped in cedar and glass, swallowed by the mist. The home exuded a quiet warmth, clean wooden lines, golden light pouring from large windows. Not flashy, just intentional. The kind of place built by a man who valued silence over spectacle. Julian met her at the door. No fanfare, no rehearsed smiles, just that steady gaze, long, direct, and still. "You live here alone?" Maya asked as they stepped inside. "Only when I need to return to myself," he replied. They made dinner together in the open kitchen. No chef, just two people fumbling through pasta, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of red wine. No one brought up contracts or money. The night stretched into conversation, from Maya's passion for design to Julian's sleepless nights fearing he might die before creating anything that truly mattered. "Have you ever been in love?" Maya asked softly as they sat before the fireplace, the crackling wood offering its own rhythm to the room. Julian watched the flames. "I thought I was, but I never gave all of myself. I was always afraid people wanted what I had, not who I was." She nodded. She knew that feeling in a different way, not from having too much, but from having too little. The next morning, they walked the trail behind the house. Sunlight streamed through the canopy like golden threads. Julian didn't reach for her hand, but the silence between them made the space feel full rather than empty. "Do you think a family can really begin from a contract?" Maya asked as they paused beside a quiet stream. Julian was thoughtful. "I think it's not how it begins. It's why." The answer echoed in her like a note that hadn't yet faded. That night, when she sat beside him, closer than before, there was no hesitation. Julian slipped an arm around her, silent. Neither of them needed to speak. She knew they were stepping beyond the edges of their agreement. And strangely, she wasn't afraid. Because in that moment, she was no longer the woman fighting to save her company, and he was no longer the man offering conditions and clauses. They were just two people beginning to believe that something beautiful could be born from the most unlikely arrangement. Maya couldn't tell if it was the wine, the gentle rhythm of rain tapping the window, or the way Julian's eyes were starting to look past her defenses and into something more vulnerable. But when he stood, walked over, and sat beside her, the space between them collapsed into something electric. "I'm not pressuring you," Julian said softly, barely above a whisper. "We can keep everything exactly as agreed, if that's what you want." She looked up at him. The firelight cast his face in shifting gold and shadow, but his eyes were clear, achingly sincere, waiting for an answer not from her mind, but from something deeper. Maya gave the smallest nod, but she didn't move away. Instead, her gaze held his. And then, before she even realized what she was doing, she leaned in. No logic, no planning. Just a heart moving to a rhythm that didn't belong to reason anymore. The kiss came softly. A question without words, slow, tentative, unsure. Maya thought she'd pull away. She should. This was a business arrangement. They had boundaries, but his lips were warm, unhurried. He didn't take, he asked with every delicate touch, "Do you feel this too?" She did. A tremor ran down her spine as his hand slipped gently behind her neck, guiding her closer. There was no urgency, no demand. Just two people, each so used to being alone, each so used to control, allowing themselves for once to be held. When Julian pulled back, he said nothing. He just looked into her eyes, longer than necessary, deeper than expected. And Maya, breath catching in her chest, whispered, "I don't know what this means, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." Julian nodded. Then don't. Let's not name it. Let's just let it be. That night, they didn't go beyond that single kiss. They didn't need to, because what shifted between them wasn't physical. It was something forming, quietly, undeniably, in the space where hearts begin to open. 3 weeks later, Maya sat on the exam table, her fingers gripping the hem of her cotton gown as the ultrasound monitor flickered to life. Beside her, Julian sat quietly, his expression calm, almost unreadable. But she could feel the subtle tremble in his hand as it rested lightly on her lower back. "I have good news," the doctor smiled. "Both babies are developing beautifully." Maya blinked. "Both?" "Yes," the doctor pointed at the screen. "Twins. 1 boy, 1 girl." Julian said nothing, but when Maya turned to look at him, she saw a smile slowly spreading across his face. Quiet, full of emotion. He gave a slight nod, then reached for her hand. And in that moment, every reason they started this, every number, every contract, faded into the background. Since their time at the estate, Julian had insisted she move into his penthouse. It wasn't a request, it was gentle, but firm. There, Maya had everything: a private doctor, a nutritionist, a quiet reading nook, and even a nursery already designed by week 10. Julian hadn't missed a single appointment. He took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and always cleared his schedule to drive her, no matter how packed his day. "You don't have to do all this," Maya said once, as he handed her a morning smoothie before dawn. "I don't have to," Julian replied, eyes still scanning his tablet. "But I want to." There was something dangerously intimate about those words. Dangerous because they didn't sound contractual. They sounded like love. But Maya didn't dare call it that. Some part of her still feared that all of this, his kindness, his attention, was part of a carefully calculated plan. That Julian, in all his devotion, was doing what was right, but not necessarily because of her. That he might love the children, but not her. That thought made her retreat. She started pulling away, smiling less, no longer leaning into him at night. And when Julian noticed, he didn't push. He gave her space. But his eyes carried the question she wasn't ready to answer. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop overlooking the glowing city skyline, Julian finally spoke, as if he'd been rehearsing it for days. "I know you're pulling away." Maya froze. "I'm not asking why," he continued, "but I want you to know, nothing in this agreement binds you to stay. You can walk away at any time. I'll keep every promise. To the children, to you." Maya's heart clenched, not because he gave her freedom, but because he was willing to let her go. And somehow, that frightened her even more. He stood still for a moment, then turned to her, his gaze steady, yet soft. "I have a question," he said quietly. "You don't have to answer unless you're ready." Her heart tightened. A quiet premonition rose, thick and undeniable. Julian pulled out a small box, wrapped in black velvet. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a show of it. He simply stood there, honest and unguarded. "I know this didn't start the way most love stories do, but you've changed everything. You're not just the mother of my children. You're the one who made me feel real again." He opened the box. Inside was a platinum ring, simple, elegant, catching the rooftop's dim light. "Maya Bennett, will you marry me?" The silence was deafening. Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding. She looked at him, the man who had given her everything she needed, who had never once tried to control her. And maybe that was why she hesitated. "Julian," she whispered, her eyes beginning to blur. "You don't have to do this, for me or for the babies." "I'm not doing this out of obligation," he said firmly. "I'm doing it because I want to call you my wife." She shook her head slowly. "I need to know if that love is real, or if it's just connection born from a contract that went too far. She reached for the box and gently pushed it back toward him. I can't say yes if I'm unsure, and I won't make you carry the weight of my hope if your heart isn't in it. Julian didn't argue. He simply nodded. His eyes held no anger, no blame, only a quiet sadness, soft as smoke, drifting into the night. I understand, he murmured. Maya turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks, and as she walked back down the stairs, her heart felt heavier than ever, because saying no to someone you love sometimes hurts more than being turned away. Week 34 of her pregnancy, Maya woke in the middle of the night, seized by an intense, unfamiliar cramp. At first, she dismissed it as a common discomfort, but when she stood and felt a warm rush between her thighs, panic surged through her body. No, not now, not this early. Julian was at his private clinic, undergoing routine heart scans. After his most recent blackout, his doctors insisted on close monitoring. Maya had promised herself not to disturb him unless it was urgent, but when the second contraction hit, stealing her breath, she knew she had no choice. The ambulance lights flashed across the city. Inside, the nurse gently asked, "Is there someone we can call?" Maya, voice cracking, whispered, "Julian Mercer. He's the only one." Across town, Julian had just stepped out of the echo room when the phone rang. He nearly ignored it, but when he saw her name on the screen, the air shifted. He listened, said nothing, then moved. No questions, no hesitation. Though the cardiologist urged him to rest, Julian threw on his shirt, grabbed his keys, and left. The night rain tapped against his windshield, light but urgent, like his heartbeat, sharp and steady, driven by one thought: Maya. At the hospital, Maya was rushed into emergency surgery. The babies were in distress, their heart rates dropping fast. She gripped the nurse's hand, voice trembling. "Where's Julian?" "He's on his way, but we can't wait much longer." She nodded through the tears, mind replaying everything, his voice reading baby books, his gentle touch in the mornings, his presence in every small moment that made this strange journey feel safe. Julian arrived as they wheeled her down the hallway. "Maya," he called. But before he could reach her, a sharp pain gripped his chest. He staggered, breath ragged, sweat drenched his brow. A nurse caught him just in time as he collapsed. Through the blur of the hospital lights, Maya turned her head and saw him fall. Her scream tore through the hallway. 2 hours later, Maya opened her eyes to soft light and a tiny warmth on her chest. Her son, one of the twins, breathed gently against her skin. The nurse smiled softly. "Both babies are healthy. You did beautifully?" Maya couldn't speak. She could only cry, overwhelmed by a love that cracked something open inside her. "Julian?" she whispered. "He passed out due to a heart complication, but he's stable now, and the first thing he asked for was you." At 3 a.m., she stood outside the ICU, 2 babies in her arms. Julian stirred, eyes fluttering open, and there she was. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "To miss seeing our children?" He smiled faintly. She dropped to her knees beside his bed, pressing her face to his hand. "I thought I could do this alone. I thought I had to. But when I saw you lying there, I realized I don't want a life without you." Julian, pale but present, cupped her face. "You never have to do it alone again. I'm here. Always." 3 days after the birth, Maya still didn't feel entirely recovered physically, but her heart was something else entirely. Every beat was stronger, clearer, certain. She knew exactly what she had to do, and this time she would be the one to say it first. Julian was sitting upright in bed, a book resting on his lap. The soft glow of late afternoon sunlight filtered through the window, casting golden streaks across his face. He still looked pale from his heart scare, but his eyes, those warm, steady eyes, were the calmest place she had ever known. Maya stepped into the room wearing a loose white shirt and fitted jeans. Her hair was tied back simply, no makeup, but something about her radiated more than any polish ever could. In her hand was a small navy blue box, the only thing she had spent time preparing over the past 3 days. Julian looked up, closing his book. "I should have asked the doctor to make you rest more. You shouldn't be walking around." "I'm fine," Maya replied, approaching the bed. "And you? Heard you've been giving the nurses a hard time." He smirked. "I can neither confirm nor deny." "Of course," she said, settling into the chair beside him. A small silence passed between them, not awkward, just necessary. A pause to align their hearts before the next words. "Julian?" "Yes?" "There's something I need to say, something I should have said sooner, but I was too afraid." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes softening. "I'm listening." "I wasn't afraid of the deal, or the babies. What scared me most was the feeling of being left behind. Again. I thought if I controlled everything, my career, my life, my emotions, then no one could hurt me. And then you walked in and wrecked all of that." Julian said nothing. He simply reached for her hand, holding it gently, like a quiet vow. "You didn't try to change me," she continued, "but you made me want to love again, to believe in something that wasn't scheduled." She opened the little box and placed it on his lap. Julian looked down. Inside was a simple platinum band. No diamonds, no flash, just clean, quiet elegance. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But if you still want to be here, not out of duty or some clause in a contract, but because of me, then today I'm the one asking." He looked into her eyes for a long moment. No surprise, no hesitation, just certainty. "You're proposing to me?" he asked softly. Maya laughed, and this time her tears weren't from fear, but from joy. "If you want to call it that." "Yes." Julian lifted the ring from the box, his fingers brushing its cool, smooth surface. Then he leaned forward, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I said yes, the first time you leaned your head on my shoulder." 6 months later, Julian's home, once a symbol of separation, had become a sanctuary. In the sun-drenched living room, Maya sat on the rug with Theo and Lila, laughing as the twins wobbled and crawled toward their parents. A soft jazz tune hummed from a speaker by the window. Julian emerged from the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug of coffee, his hair tousled from changing diapers. "I swear Theo is plotting a rebellion," he chuckled. "He smiled at you, then peed on me." Maya laughed, reaching for the cup, tilting her head with a teasing glint in her eyes. Maybe he takes after his mother. They had grown into the sweet chaos, sleepless nights, tears, giggles, and a closeness that needed no labels. There was no longer a line between agreement and genuine. There was just family. That afternoon, after the twins had drifted off to sleep, Julian placed a folder on the dining table. "What's this?" Maya asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he flipped to the first page, the old contract, the one that had once bound them. Under the warm amber light, the printed words looked sharp, clinical, and cold. Julian picked up the first sheet, met her eyes, and slowly tore it in half. The paper fell to the floor in pieces, like fragments of a past they no longer needed. "I don't want a contract anymore," he said softly, "because the only thing I want to hold on to is you, not out of duty, but because I love you." Maya couldn't find the words. Her eyes spoke for her. That night, as they sat wrapped in silence and firelight, Maya took his hand. "Let's go back," she whispered, "to where it all started." Julian didn't ask where. he already knew. The next day they flew to Denver, the place where it all began. Snow fell gently, blanketing the roof of the Grand West Hotel in soft white. They didn't need to say it aloud, but both knew. This was where the new chapter should begin. Inside the quiet lobby in front of the same fireplace that had once warmed strangers, Julian turned to Maya. "I don't want to wait for the wedding to say this," he whispered, pulling out an envelope. Inside wasn't a ring, it was a handwritten note on plain paper. The heading read, "Lifetime Commitment." No clauses, no dates, just one line. "I choose you, today, tomorrow, and all the days after." No reasons, just love. Maya said nothing. She simply stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and kissed him. Deep, soft, just as the first flakes of snow dusted their hair. It was still snowing, but this time it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the warmth of being chosen, fully, freely, not by contract, but by love. No more clauses, no more waiting. Just two hearts, steady and home. It was a soft spring morning, not too cold, not too warm. Sunlight filtered gently through budding trees outside the window, reflecting off the mirror where Maya fastened the last button on her ivory wedding dress. It wasn't grand. No dramatic train, no glitzy details. But it was exactly what she wanted. Simple, elegant, and light, like the steps she was about to take. The room was adorned with lavender and baby's breath, graceful and understated, much like her love for Julian. It hadn't been explosive, it hadn't been a whirlwind, but it was real in every breath, every quiet gesture. Their twins, Theo and Lila, were with the nanny for a few hours. 6 months old now, chubby and all smiles, especially when Julian sang old jazz tunes he adored. Julian was waiting for her downstairs in a place that meant everything, the lobby of the Grand West Hotel in Denver. The very same place Maya had wandered into half a year ago, heart heavy, eyes guarded. And the place where she had met the man who would gently, irrevocably, shift the axis of her entire world. She used to think love had to be loud, sleepless nights, wild declarations, dizzying highs. But then came Julian, not with noise, not with promises, but with presence. And his love, in its quiet strength, had healed pieces of her she never thought could be whole again. The wedding was small, 40 guests at most, close friends, former colleagues, a few family members. No one spoke of the contract. No one mentioned the near scandal that had once threatened her reputation. All they saw was two people looking at each other like the world had paused for this moment alone. Julian didn't read vows from a piece of paper. He looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I built an empire with logic and precision, but you are the first thing in my life I didn't calculate. You are the only thing I've ever chosen, with my heart." Maya smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. This time, she didn't rush to wipe it away. She let it fall. Let it become a permanent part of this memory. After the ceremony, as they stepped into the sunlight, Julian gently pulled her aside. From the inner pocket of his suit, he drew out a folded sheet of paper, the original agreement they had once signed. He didn't say a word. He tore it in half. "This," he whispered, hand over her heart, "is the only contract I believe in now. No signatures, no end date, just you, just us, forever."